Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Gora Nitai, Jaya Gora Nitai, Jaya Gora Nitai, Jaya Gora Nitai. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Gaur Premananda, Hari Hari Bol. So the topic of this talk is Vimanas, accounts of spacecraft in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Sanskrit word for spacecraft or aircraft is Vimana. And, there are a couple of sources about Vimanas. One source is temple sculptures. There's a place in India called the Ellora cave temples. It's near Aurangabad in the Maharashtra state. And there they have a big mountain made of stone. And in this stone mountain, there are carved many temples. This is the Kailash rock-carved temple. They're very amazing places. Huge temples are just carved out of the solid rock with all kinds of passageways and rooms and everything. I guess they just started from the top and worked their way down. And some of them are like this Kailash temple. Others are huge caves carved into the solid rock. And among the carvings you can see are some depicting Vimanas or flying craft. So circled in the red there, you see a Vimana or aircraft in one of the Ellora cave temples. I've also been to the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia. It's a huge Vishnu temple the Vedic culture had spread to that part of the world. And it's a huge temple. There are many carvings on the walls of that temple, and some of them depict the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra, and some of them show Lord Ramachandra flying to his capital of Ayodhya in his Pushpa Vimana, which was an aircraft that originally belonged to Ravan. So there are many places in India where you can see these Vimanas depicted in temple wall carvings. But there are also many accounts of Vimanas in the Vedic text, the Sanskrit text. And today I'm going to concentrate on some descriptions of Vimanas that are given in the Bhagavad Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam. So to understand the descriptions of Vimanas that are given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we first have to have some basic conception of the cosmology that's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Basically, it's a multi-level cosmos. Of course, you can get into very elaborate descriptions of the different levels of the cosmos, the different planetary systems. But in a simple way, we could say there are three basic levels. Starting at the bottom there's the gross material level, which is where we find ourselves now. It's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there. Beyond that, there's a subtle material level where you have everything made of subtle material energies, subtle mental and intellectual energies. And it's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there, the devas, basically, or the demigods. People in other cultures might have different names for them. And then beyond that, there's the totally non-material or spiritual level, and it's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there. And there are Vimanas that originate in all three of these levels, and I'm going to give an example of each. Of course, this idea of a multi-level cosmos inhabited by all kinds of beings existing at these different levels is something that is a little bit unusual for modern scientists to consider, but some have stretched their minds to embrace such things. This is Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at the Harvard University Medical School. He wrote in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, it appears ever more likely that we exist in a multidimensional cosmos. The cosmos appears to be filled with beings, creatures, spirits, intelligences, gods. So that's, the kind of cosmos that the Srimad Bhagavatam is speaking about. Of course, I mention these things and the scientific evidence that supports them in my book, Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. But the point I'd like to make this afternoon is that there are different kinds of Vimanas or spacecraft that relate to these different levels, the spiritual level, the subtle material level, and the gross material level. So I'm going to start with a Vimana from the spiritual level of reality. That is the Vimana that took Dhruva Maharaj to the spiritual world. Of course, you know the story of Dhruva Maharaj. I mean, basically, just to summarize the essential element, when he was a young boy, he went out into the forest to find God. And he met Narada Muni, who tried to persuade him to go back home, but he was very insistent. He was very determined to carry out his goal of seeing God. So Narada Muni told him, if you want to do that, I'll give you a mantra you can chant, and if you go to this specific place, the Mahavan forest in Vrindavan, and meditate upon that mantra, you will see God. So he did that. And then towards the end of his life, Dhruva Maharaj went to the Himalayan mountains to practice yoga. He had been a great king, but following the Vedic system, at the end of his life, he left his royal position and went into the mountains to meditate and prepare for leaving his body. So he entered into a state of trance where he was experiencing his conscious self as different from his material body. And at that time, a Vimana or spacecraft descended from the spiritual level of reality. He saw it descending from the sky. And the description of this that's given in the Srimad Bhagavatam is very beautiful. He saw a very beautiful Vimana coming down from the sky as if the brilliant full moon were coming down, illuminating all the 10 directions. So you can imagine what it would be like to be in the mountains and say you saw the full moon up in the sky, and then it started descending, getting bigger and bigger, brighter and brighter. So in that glowing, illuminated Vimana, Dhruva saw 2 personalities. They were personalities from Vaikuntha, the spiritual level of reality. And they told him they had been specifically sent to take him, Dhruva, to Vaikuntha, that spiritual level of reality. So they motioned for him to board the Vimana, to get on it, enter it. So as he was boarding the Vimana, he could feel his body being transformed. And there's a description of this in this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Iyeshatadi dishtatum bibrab rupam hiranmayam. As he boarded the Vimana, his body became illuminated like molten gold. So there was some kind of energy transformation going on there. So the Vimana began to travel upward into the sky. And as it went upward, Dhruva could see the various planetary systems as he was going by them. And there's some idea to have an experience like this in the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, something of this nature. So, first he saw the planets of our solar system go by, and then the Vimana reached the subtle material planets and passed through them, and finally it arrived at Vaikuntha, actually the local Vaikuntha planet, Dhruva Loka, which is, according to the Srimad Bhagavatam and Srila Prabhupada's explanation of it, a Vaikuntha planet that's located within the sphere of this material universe, but it is a Vaikuntha planet. So, in this example, the Vimana of Dhruva Maharaj, we see there was a Vimana that originated in Vaikuntha that descended to the level of the gross material elements, our level of reality. Then Dhruva boarded that Vimana, and then it went back up to that higher spiritual level of reality, passing through the different gross and subtle material planetary systems. So it's interesting to consider when this took place. According to the Srimad Bhagavatam, Dhruva Maharaj lived during the Swayambhuva Manvantar period. So we have to understand a little something about the cyclical concept of time that's given in the Vedic literature, including the Srimad Bhagavatam. The basic unit of that cyclical time is called the kalpa, or the day of Brahma. It lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which lasts the same period of time. Then there's another day, another night, and the cycles go on and on and on. But the kalpa, or day of Brahma, is divided into 14 sub-cycles called manvantars. Each one lasts about 300 million years. So today we are in the middle of the 7th manvantar period in the current kalpa, or day of Brahma. And the Srimad Bhagavatam tells us that Dhruva Maharaj lived during the Swayambhuva Manvantar, which is the first Manvantar in the current day of Brahma, or the Kalpa. So that is between 1.7 and 2 billion years ago. So it was a long time ago. But Srimad Bhagavatam is telling us that at that time there was human civilization, and not just civilization on this planet, but there's interplanetary and interdimensional civilization, and there were Vimanas or spacecraft at that time. So the Vimana of Dhruva Maharaj was a spiritual Vimana. So now I'm going to talk about a subtle material Vimana. And that was the subtle material Vimana manifested by the great yogi and devotee Kardama Muni. So he had his wife and he wanted to take her on a journey through the universe, kind of like maybe people today, a husband and wife, they might buy a motorhome or something and go traveling all around. But he was a great yogi and he could manifest something more impressive than a motorhome. He manifested a flying city, a huge Vimana, just using his yogic mystic powers. So it's an entirely different kind of technology than we're used to today. Today, if we want to build an airplane, we have to go dig mines, we have to get metal ores, we have to refine them, turn them into metals, go into factories and put it all together. But Kardama Muni could do this. He could manifest this huge flying city made of subtle material elements just using his yogic siddhis or perfections. And it's interesting how this Vimana would move. Kardamo yogamashtita vimanam kamagam chatas tarhyeva rachikirarat. The sage Kardama exercised his yogic power and instantly produced a Vimana that could travel at his will. In other words, he would just think, go here, and it would go there. And actually, modern militaries are now trying to develop a similar kind of technology, a similar kind of capability, because their military aircraft are now traveling at such high speeds that it's very difficult for pilots to control them, especially in combat situations where they're confronting other aircraft that are also moving at these very high speeds. It's just almost impossible to control them simply by hand. So they're actually trying to develop methods by which brain waves can direct the craft. But Kardama Muni was able to do this. It says his Vimana would move at his will, kamagam, wherever he desired mentally, it would go. Now there was an interesting feature of this Vimana, this huge flying city that he used to travel all over the universe with. And here's what I found very interesting. This verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam describing this Vimana. In that Vimana were live swans and pigeons, as well as artificial swans and pigeons, so lifelike that the real swans, vibrating sounds, flew up to them, thinking them live birds like themselves. So in our modern world, scientists are trying to develop robot technology, artificial intelligence, and things like that. And Actually, I read something in a newspaper report that actually they're trying to do the same kind of thing that was mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, develop artificial birds that are so real that other birds will think, hey, it's another bird just like me. The newspaper, the Washington Times, reported a robotic bird created by the U.S. Army for use as a miniature spy drone is so convincing that it has been attacked by hawks and eagles. In other words, they think it's another bird. And I've been seeing some documentaries on the National Geographic Channel where they've, for the purposes of filming wildlife, they've developed robotic animals. Like if they want to film lions, they make an artificial lion cub with a camera in it, to kind of go play with the lion so they can get close-up pictures. So it's interesting that these things, artificial birds, so lifelike, are described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, the Srimad Bhagavatam goes on to say, Kardama traveled in the Vimana through the planets, moving like the wind. His Vimana, which could fly at his will, surpassed the Vimanas of the demigods. So that is a subtle material Vimana. So Dhruva Maharaj's Vimana, that was spiritual, made of spiritual elements. Kardama Muni's Vimana was made of subtle material elements, manifested by his yogic power. Now we're going to consider a gross material Vimana that's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that is the Vimana of King Shalva. So the Bhagavad Gita tells us, there's always been two types of beings in the universe. There's the Suras and the Asuras. There are those who are godly, and then there are those who are ungodly. And sometimes they're fighting with each other. Of course, Lord Krishna, he takes, for the most part, the side of the Suras, the godly personalities. So King Shalva, he was on the side of the Asuras. And he got a Vimana from Mayadanava, who was the engineer of the Asuras, or the demoniac forces in the universe. And the Srimad Bhagavatam describes Mayadanava, who conquers his enemies' cities, constructed a flying iron city named Saubha and presented it to Shalva. So it's made of iron, steel. It's not a spiritual Vimana, it's not a subtle material Vimana, it's a Vimana made of metal. So, as I mentioned, Mayadanava is the engineer of the demoniac forces in the cosmos. So, you could say that this is an example of extraterrestrial technology transfer. King Shalva was a king on this earth, and he got this Vimana from a higher being, Maya Danava, the engineer of the Asuras. And as I said, this Vimana was made of metal. So this Vimana had another interesting feature. The Srimad Bhagavatam says, this unassailable vehicle was filled with darkness and could go anywhere. Upon obtaining it, Shalva went to Dwarka, Krishna's city of Dwarka. So this idea that it was filled with darkness kind of suggests some kind of cloaking technology whereby it could go dark. You know, like sometimes we talk about, what is it, the dark web, you know, where you kind of go invisible. So, of course, we're here in New Dwarka, but in Bharatavarsha, in India, there's this original city of Dwarka, which is in the Gujarat state on the coast. And this is the modern city of Dwarka. And off the coast of Dwarka, archaeologists have found ruins of a city underwater. And Srila Prabhupada has said that sometimes off the coast of Dwarka, people perceive ruins of Krishna's city, which went underwater 5,000 years ago. So King Shalva was using his Vimana made of iron to attack the city of Dwarka. And he was using all kinds of weapons. One of them is described here. From the Vimana came down torrents of weapons, and one of them is called Ashanayaha, which is translated as thunderbolts. So some kind of energy beam kind of weapon, like a thunderbolt. And it said, when the city was attacked like this, a fierce whirlwind arose and blanketed all directions with dust. So it was a very intensive attack on Krishna's city. Srimad Bhagavatam says, thus, terribly tormented by the spaceship Salba, Lord Krishna's city had no peace. O king, just like the earth when it was attacked by the three aerial cities of the demons. So here in the middle of this description of King Shalva's Vimana that he was using to attack the city of Dwarka, we're given a reference to some other Vimanas, flying craft that were used by demons to attack the earth. And so it's a little bit of an interlude in the story of King Shalva's Vimana, but it's worth going into. Lord Shiva shot down these three flying cities, these three huge Vimanas, and therefore one of the names of Shiva is Tripurari. Tri means three, Pura means cities, Ari means the enemy of. So we can see in the painting there from Srimad Bhagavatam, Shiva shooting down those 3 flying cities that were used to attack the earth in ancient times. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavad Purana, describes this in the 10th chapter of the 7th canto. The whole series of events went like this. First, the demigods, the Suras, defeated the demons, the Asuras, in a cosmic battle. Then Mayadanava gave the demons 3 huge metal Vimanas with the power of invisibility. And the demons, the Asuras, used these Vimanas to conquer various planetary systems. We have these movies, Star Wars. Well, the Star Wars, the interplanetary wars, were going on long, long ago, and these battles are described in the Vedic literature, such as the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, because they were being defeated in this way, the demigods asked Shiva for help. So, Shiva attacked these flying cities, these spaceships of the demons, with a weapon that are called in the Srimad Bhagavatam arrows. But they're not ordinary arrows. If you think of an arrow as a thin little piece of wood with some feathers on the end and a sharp tip, not like that. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, these arrows are described. It says, the arrows released by Lord Shiva appeared like fiery beams emanating from the sun globe. So, not an ordinary arrow, something more like an anti-satellite missile roaring across the sky to shoot down an enemy spacecraft. So, when Shiva used these weapons to kill the demons that were piloting these huge Vimanas, Mayadanava restored the Asuras, the demons, to life by putting them into a reservoir of a special liquid that he had. In other words, Shiva was killing them, destroying them, but Mayadanava put their bodies in this tank of this special liquid, and they came back. So they resumed the battle. But then Lord Krishna, and we can understand this as devotees of Krishna, Krishna gave Shiva new, more powerful weapons, which Shiva used to finally destroy these flying city Vimanas of the Asuras. So that's our little interlude about Shiva shooting down the flying cities of the demons. But now back to the attack on Dwarka by the Vimana of King Shalva. So on the ground in Dwarka, the members of the Yadu dynasty, Krishna's relatives, were trying to do everything they could to shoot down King Shalva's airplane, or Vimana. But it was very hard. They found it impossible to do. The Srimad Bhagavatam says, at one moment, the Vimana built by Mayadanava appeared in many identical forms And the next moment, it was again only one. Sometimes it was visible, and sometimes not. Thus, Shalva's opponents could never be sure where it was. And our modern militaries are trying to develop technologies like that. They have their ICBMs with their nuclear warheads, and they try to make them in such a way that they can fool the radar systems of the country that's trying to defend against them by sending many false or decoy images so that the defenders can never tell which is the real warhead. Militaries are trying to do these things, but this craft designed and built by Maya Donova, it had that kind of capability. So sometimes it was, would appear here, 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 and they were trying to look, how do we shoot it down? They could never be sure where it really was. And then sometimes it was visible, sometimes invisible. It's like now, the modern militaries, they're trying to develop what they call stealth technology, whereby their attacking craft can become invisible to the defenders. So that's just a very crude, perverted reflection of these higher abilities that are being described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Krishna was leading his forces. He was in a chariot on the ground. Of course, Krishna could do anything at any moment. But sometimes he plays with his enemies like a cat plays with a mouse. Lets it run away, do this or that. At any moment, the cat can just put an end to it. So Krishna's like that. He's the all-powerful Supreme Personality of Godhead. But sometimes, for the purposes of his Leela, he lets things unfold in a very, sometimes even bewildering way. So, it's said in the Srimad Bhagavatam that Shalva launched what is called a spear at Krishna's chariot. But again, it's not an ordinary spear. If you think of a spear as just a piece of wood with a little metal tip on it or something, not exactly like that. Shaktim Bhima Ravam Hriday, the Srimad Bhagavatam says, Shalva's spear made a frightening, roaring sound on the battlefield. And then this additional description is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Shalva's hurtling spear lit up the whole sky like a mighty meteor, but Krishna tore the great weapon into hundreds of pieces with his arrows. And again, these spears, arrows, are not just little sticks of wood. It's more like, these anti-missile missiles, like Krishna's arrows shooting down the spear of Shalva is more like, something like an anti-missile missile intercepting another missile coming to attack. So there's some description in Srimad Bhagavatam of Krishna's arrows. Krishna struck Shalva's Vimana with a torrent of arrows, appearing like the powerful rays of the sun. So then something very interesting happens. It's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So first, Shalva comes out of the Vimana and personally attacks Krishna. In other words, the Vimana is hovering in the sky. Shalva is beamed down to the surface. And then he starts attacking Krishna on his chariot. So Krishna wounds Shalva. He strikes him with his weapons. Shalva's wounded. But at that moment, Shalva mysteriously just disappears, vanishes. And then, just as mysteriously, a messenger appears, saying to Krishna, "Your mother has sent me to tell you that Shalva has captured your father." And then, very mysteriously, Shalva reappears on the battlefield with Krishna's father, Vasudeva, as his captive. And then, Srimad Bhagavatam says, Shalva cuts the head off Krishna's father with his sword. And then the Srimad Bhagavatam says, Utkritya Shira Adaya Kashtam Salbam Samavishat. Taking the head with him, Shalva entered his Vimana, which was hovering in the sky above him. So he cuts off the head of Krishna's father. Holding it in his hand, he floats up back into the Vimana that's hovering over the sky right there. It's just an amazing scene, an amazing, incredible scene. But then, Srimad Bhagavatam says, Krishna detected that this was an illusion engineered by Maya Danava and employed by Shalva. And how did Krishna detect that this was just some trick or illusion? Srimad Bhagavatam says, Na tatra dutam na patu kalevaram. Krishna could see neither the messenger nor the headless body of his father. So, when Shalva went back up into the Vimana that was hovering above them, Krishna saw that the body of his father disappeared, just vanished, and the messenger also just vanished. So he could detect. This is kind of a 3D illusion that had been manifested by the technology that was available in that Vimana. And, there's some attempt these days to develop this kind of apparently 3D holographic imagery that can fool people into thinking a real person is there. It's used by musical performers. Sometimes musical performers, instead of appearing on stage, they project, a 3D image. There was a famous thing that happened at the Coachella Music Festival where Snoop Dogg was singing and interacting with a holographic projection of another hip-hop singer, Tupac. So And militaries are actually trying to develop these kinds of technologies to even a higher degree. So Krishna could detect, that the whole show was just an illusion manufactured by the technology that Maya Danava had given Shalva. And then Krishna just put an end to the whole thing. As I said, he could have done this right in the beginning, but Krishna is very dramatic in the way that he does things. So in the end, it says, smashed to pieces by Krishna's weapon, the Vimana fell into the sea. So if anybody's looking for the remains of a crashed UFO, maybe one place to look would be off the coast of Dwarka. So, the point that I'll leave you with is that we've here talked about three kinds of Vimanas described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Dhruva Maharaja's spiritual Vimana, Kardama Muni's subtle material Vimana, and the gross material Vimana used by King Shalva to attack the city of Dwarka. And there's many other descriptions of Vimanas in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures as well. And, for some people, it's something that could, attract them to a book. That there's such interesting descriptions and really wonderful pastimes. Okay, so I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes?
Yeah, I just want to talk real quick about the subtle material Vimana.
Okay.
You were mentioning about Kardama Muni, and Kardama Muni, it was kind of like a yogi, and just by his thought, he can create this mansion. And then you were saying about the current military, they're kind of tapping into this wave frequency to control the airplanes. But can they really tap into this power also without the austerity and meditation that goes along with receiving these types of powers?
Well, as I said, what they're doing is some kind of perverted reflection of these realities that are described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's the kinds of powers that are manifested by the demigods and great yogis are based on an entirely different kind of technology. What modern scientists are trying to do is manipulate the gross material energies in a way that imitates to some degree what these yogis and demigods and even demons were kind of able to do. And ultimately, if anybody, whether it's a demigod or a demon or a yogi, is trying to manipulate Krishna's energies without engaging them in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then they're going to get into trouble in one way or another. It's like we can see, scientists, technologists, they're inventing so many things, but they're just creating more problems for themselves. So yes, I mean, you can read, the reports. They are trying to find ways that pilots can control military aircraft moving at very high rates of speed, either by eye movements or thought waves. And, there's even some medical technologies where they're trying to give people the ability to mentally control prosthetic limbs and things like that. But it's all very imperfect reflection of these abilities that are manifested by, these higher beings. But even that, even to be able to do that, that's, for a devotee, that's not the goal of life. Goal of life is to be the humble servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I mean, Srila Prabhupada was sometimes asked, can you manifest any mystic powers like that? And maybe he could, but he said, no, my mystic power is that I'm able to make non-devotees into devotees, which is kind of the highest thing. Something else? Yes?
And, sometimes devotees think that there are no humans in Loka Vrindavan.
There are no humans in Goloka Vrindavan.
Sometimes devotees think that in Goloka Vrindavan there are no Vimanas.
No demons. Oh, Vimanas. Vimana.
Yeah, in Goloka Vrindavan. But in Brihad Bhagavatamritam, where Gopal Kumar took a Vimana down from Goloka Vrindavan down to Kokomo here on earth. So it's mentioned in Brihad Bhagavatamritam.
Okay, that's a very good point, that in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita there are descriptions of Vimanas, including the one used by Gopakumar to descend from Goloka Vrindavan to Gokula. Yeah, Vrindavan on this earth. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are descriptions of Vimanas in the Vaikuntha planets beyond the material world. There's some descriptions of them, but that's an interesting point that adds to my understanding of Vimanas in the Vedic cosmos. Thank you for that. Something else? Okay.
What about, there's been the reports, of course now it's all coming out worldwide, whether it's French government, English government, U.S. government's always the last one, but about many of these craft that are material. I mean, they take a solid, have a solid form, then they can become subtle for fighting purposes or strategic purposes, but this is going on. So when you see subtle material, what's a Sanskrit for that, subtle? Because subtle we usually think of like air or what you can't see or feel. I mean, you can feel air. If it's something that goes from gross to subtle, then what category would that be under? Subtle material, or because you were describing subtle material referred more to Karmamuni. But that seems to be extremely subtle material. So, like in the researchers, of course, you also have researchers. So, did you have any idea, kind of like was there a name for that? Or, like even when you read it about Sola, he had an iron craft, and this is all of a sudden it disappeared. Nobody could tell where it was, and all of a sudden it would reappear. So was it just like a screen, like a blinding screen or something put in front, but it was still solidly there, it just moved over, and then the screen dropped, or whatever you want to call it? Or did it actually disappear, and even if you shot a rocket there, it wouldn't be there, but it would reappear over here? So that would be subtle, growth going into a subtle form. So it's, something to contemplate, but I was wondering about that subtle material, like Prabhu brought up. I mean, because sometimes the things that are manifest now, they look like mystic powers that were sown back in the 1900s or 1800s, and they saw what is now. It would appear to be almost like yogic power,
Well, I don't know anything more than what is stated in the Shastras. But say, for example, you have this image of Krishna's father that was produced, according to the Srimad Bhagavatam, by some power of Maya Danava. It said it's illusory. So I would take that to mean that it's subtle in that sense. And, it's described that that craft was made of iron, so it was made of metals. So, and it said it had this ability to produce duplicate images of itself. And therefore, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it said the defenders in the city couldn't shoot it down. To me, that kind of indicates, what that suggests is that if they had been able to direct their arrow at the right one, they would have hit it. If they were able to direct their weapons at the correct one, it would have. Or if it had momentarily become invisible to them, if they had been able to direct their weapon to the proper spot, it would have hit it. I'm trying not to go too far beyond what's stated in the Shastras, but it's an interesting point that you raised.
So Krishna, when he looked, he didn't see it, like you were saying. It was according to the scripture. But then everyone else saw possibly the head being cut off. So like you said, illusionary. So it's very interesting. So from one angle.
Well, but then it like the body was lying on the ground. The headless body of Vasudeva was lying on the ground, and then it disappeared. The messenger disappeared. So that's how Krishna could detect. It was illusory. It's just kind of interesting details and a very intriguing pastime.
They have it where now one lady was describing where she could see a UFO or Vimana, could see it, and a friend next to her couldn't see it. So in other words, is that whether she had higher vision or whether it was illusory, it's interesting.
Well, like we've been hearing in the readings of the Chaitanya Charitamrita about Ratha Yatra, Lord Chaitanya was dancing in lots of different kirtan parties, but only two of the devotees could actually perceive that he was actually dancing, and all the rest just thought, he's in mine. He's in my party. Lord Chaitanya is dancing in mind, but Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and King Prataparuta could see Lord Chaitanya present in all the different parties. So sometimes, I always try to go back to Shastra when I'm thinking about it, because what do I know? What's the value of my speculation? Is it possible that something could be perceived by one person and not but be seen by another? According to Shastra, yes. Satyanarayan Prabhu. I've seen those reports, yes. Yeah. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Jai Jagannath.